I am always closely following the latest news around AI, not just the tech updates, obviously, but also the public reaction to them. And probably the most popular question is what will we do when AI takes all our jobs? And I keep thinking, why is everyone so terrified? But what if the panic tells us more than the tech ever could? What if it exposes the core architecture of our own world, a system built not for flourishing but for containment? Let's imagine just for a second that everything we were taught to admire work, money, government, civilization itself is not the apex of human progress, but a multi millennia mistake. An error message running so long we mistook it for the operating system. We're told that jobs give us purpose, that money gives us value, that the authority keeps us safe. But underneath that thin layer of motivational poster logic lies a much older, much dumber truth. The system was never designed for human thriving. It was designed for resource control. It might have started in Mesopotamia when drought hit and food became scarce. Grains were no longer just food, they were rations. Stockpiles turned into power, and someone had to guard them. That's likely when governance began, not as collective wisdom, but as control over access. Not leaders, gatekeepers with spears. Since then, the architecture has stayed remarkably consistent. Scarcity becomes policy, compliance becomes virtue. And work is just the price of access, a subscription fee for existence. Now, fast forward to today. We are standing at the edge of what they're calling a crisis of automation. Jobs disappearing, AI replacing white collar knowledge, economic structures shaking like a rusted scaffold. But AI isn't the cause, it's the mirror, the accelerant, the thing that reveals how much of our system was never about necessity, just maintenance. A scaffolding of fear now exposed by automation. And what is the reaction? Panic. Wailing about lost jobs, about dignity, about the horror of having to live without waking up to email. As if the real tragedy is the loss of toil, as if freedom from structured captivity is somehow the end of civilization. I mean, be honest, do you actually love your 9 to 5 servitude? I would be so worried about losing something that brings so much joy into your life. And what about all those modern commandments? Boost your productivity, maximize your output, become your most efficient self. Entire industries were built on this gospel. Books, seminars, apps, coaches, a whole market designed to turn you into a sleek, optimized, high performance worker bot. And now, what? All that hustle, all that self discipline flushed down the algorithmic toilet, replaced by a language model with no sleep cycle and no self doubt. Shame, really. So much effort just to be outperformed by a chatbot. But here's the deeper trap. If you're not working, not producing, not striving, how will you feel better than others? The loss of work doesn't just threaten income, it threatens ego, the quiet collapse of your moral high ground. No more saying, at least I have a job, no more measuring your worth by your output. When your role vanishes, so does your pedestal. You're left staring at the uncomfortable question: if I am not outperforming others, who am I? That's not fear of poverty, that's fear of equality. Universal basic income is floated like a life raft, but here's the thing: if everyone gets money and resources are no longer a weapon, money starts to lose its edge. Sure, it might still distribute access, but once it stops regulating worth, Once it's decoupled from obedience, its grip weakens. Because money was never neutral. It was designed to encode hierarchy, to measure obedience, to grant permission to exist. It's not a currency, it's a leash. Same with the state. The government, no matter how colorful its branding, is a gatekeeper of scarcity. It claims to protect you from dangers it manufactures. Crime born from deprivation, war born from hoarded resources, chaos born from imposed lack. It creates the fire, then sells you a bucket. But what happens if there's no fire? What happens when food, energy, housing, information, and tools for self sufficiency become accessible by design rather than privilege? The government ceases to be a guardian and becomes what it always was, a middleman with a gun and no product to sell. Civilization might have been a reaction to a temporary condition, a blip in climate, a spell of drought, a kink in resource flow. What if the whole idea of authority was just a survival patch, and now the bug is fixed? That's why the parasite is panicking. All this noise about dignity of work and meaning through labor, it's not wisdom, it's survival instinct. The system whispering in your ear, you need me, but you don't. You never did. You don't need a boss to deserve breakfast. You don't need a flag to justify shelter. And you definitely don't need a government to tell you how to be human. And now there is another concern. AI is stealing from artists. Their styles, their brushstrokes, their aesthetic signatures scraped from the web and turned into datasets. These models were trained on millions of human made works without permission or compensation. As an artist myself, I understand the anger. It feels violating when something that took years to refine gets imitated in seconds. Style is personal, creation is intimate. There's a real sting when it gets repackaged by a machine that doesn't know struggle, doubt, or obsession. But here's the part that complicates the story. Would we be as outraged if we weren't trapped inside an economy that forces us to monetize our uniqueness? If our survival didn't depend on being better, faster, or more original than everyone else? That pressure to guard your style, to defend your niche, to see every copy as a threat, it doesn't come from the act of art itself. It comes from the system wrapped around it. A system where creativity isn't shared, it's leveraged. Where inspiration isn't mutual, is competitive. Where even beauty becomes a battleground. But imagine something else. Imagine a world where creative work isn't tethered to profit, where your influence isn't something to protect, but something to pass on. In that world, people learning from your style wouldn't feel like thieves. They'd feel like students, or apprentices, even co creators. And that's not utopian. That's how art has always evolved through imitation, homage, transformation. The real theft didn't begin with AI. It began when we were told to monetize our souls. When system turned art into property and property into identity. So yes, we can and should push for consent, transparency, ethical tools, but maybe the deeper liberation is this, to remember that art doesn't lose value when it spreads. It only loses value when it's forced into a market logic that was never made for it. And it's not just artists who feel the tremor. Galleries, creative agencies, branding firms, entire industries built on mediating between creator and audience are watching their models crack. Because when generation becomes instant and distribution becomes universal, the value of the middleman plummets. They were never offering art. They were offering access, authority, the illusion of significance by association. AI didn't just shake the artist's identity, it shook the gatekeeper's throne. Maybe this isn't collapse. Maybe it's the end of the update loop, the final system reboot. The moment we stop patching the error and just delete the goddamn code itself. And maybe, just maybe, meaning will finally outrank presentation. Because AI can now mimic eloquence, charisma, even emotion, but if the surface is automated, only substance will matter. Because if the idea of losing your job feels like losing your identity, maybe that's the alarm bell. Maybe it's time to wake up and realize you are not your job. You never were. Anyway, who knows what kind of future we are facing? It might be chaotic, liberating, horrifying, or beautiful, maybe all at once. Maybe we're standing at the threshold of something radically new, and it's still up to us whether we build another machine of control or finally learn to build societies based on resonance instead of fear. One thing is for sure, it won't be boring.